So I should just start. Can everyone hear me? Is the mic about right? So I'm going to introduce your wonderful panel here. And we're going to speak for about 5 minutes. They're going to speak for about 5 minutes. And then we'll have a discussion amongst ourselves and open it up to Q&A. So we'll start with Prajwal Parajuly. And he is the son of an Indian father and a Nepalese mother. The Gurkha's Daughter, his debut collection of stories, was shortlisted for the Dylan Thomas Prize in the UK and longlisted for the Story Prize in the US. Land Where I Flee, his first novel, was published this year to international acclaim. You can find Parajuly's writings in the New York Times, Guardian, New Statesman, and on BBC. He's currently the Clayton B. Ofsted Endowed Distinguished Writer in Residence at Truman State University. He lives between London and New York. So welcome, Prajwal. We also have on the panel Janice Gould. Janice is a lesbian Native American writer whose tribal affiliation is Concow. She's earned awards from the National Endowments for the Arts, the Estrella Foundation, Pikes Peak Arts Council, and the School for Advanced Research in Santa Fe. Her recent book of poetry, Doubters and Dreamers, was a finalist for the Colorado Book and the Milt Kessler Book Awards. Janice is an associate professor at the University of Colorado, Colorado Springs, and is the Pikes Peak Laureate for 2014 through 2016. Welcome, Janice. Manil Suri grew up in Mumbai, India, and is now a mathematics professor at the University of Maryland, Baltimore County. His novels, The Death of Vishnu, The Age of Shiva, and The City of Devi, form a trilogy exploring the present, past, and imagined future of India. His fiction has won several awards and has been translated into 27 languages. He's a contributing opinion writer for the New York Times, writing about India, gay rights, and mathematics. William Hayward Henderson holds a degree in creative writing from Brown University, and he was a Wallace Stegner Fellow in creative writing at Stanford. His 3 novels, Native, The Rest of the Earth, and Augusta Locke, are set mainly in Wyoming and explore the themes of family, home, sexuality, and Native culture. About Native, Benjamin Seance said, "We would do well to remember that Native predates both Annie Proulx's Brokeback Mountain and the real-life tragedy surrounding the death of Matthew Shepard. The themes played out in both of those narratives, one fictional and the other all too real, are themes that William Henderson handles subtly and delicately in this strange and urgent and painful novel. If we want to understand the real story of the American West and meditate on the nature of our humanity and inhumanity, Native is a good place for anyone to begin." Henderson directs the book project at the Lighthouse Writers Workshop in Denver, and he teaches in the MFA program at Ashland University. Bill Henderson. So we have a great and diverse panel. Let's hear from them now. Please, we can just go right down the line here.
Okay. So, I'll just say one thing that was interesting. All of us were talking about the title, Rainbow Readings. Does it mean LGBT or some other rainbow or whatever? And you know, the instructions we got, the line that was given, it's something about convictions and beliefs. So I don't know. So it'll be very interesting to see what comes of it. But interestingly enough, I think we found that all of our books have some kind of thing like that. So I'm actually going to read you a little bit, just a page or so, from the new book, The City of Devi. And this book is set in the future of India. There's been all sorts of events that have caused a very dystopian version of Bombay or Mumbai to emerge. There's a woman, Sarita, she's looking for her husband, Karun, who is vanished in the midst of all this mayhem. And the part I'm going to read to you about is another character, Jazz, who is a Muslim, and he's gay, and his parents have grown up, have basically taken him from city to city, country to country while he's been growing up, and he's never quite known what you know. He's always had this this depression or whatever. He's never quite known what the problem was. So the part that I'm going to read, it happens right after his 15th birthday, where he takes a pin and he plunges it into his tongue and then blows out the candles on his birthday cake with blood, which is off screen. I'm going to say what happens after that. So, my parents' solution was to move once more. To Mother India this time, which would unscramble my identity, fill my heart with pride in who I was, where I came from. That's how the young and still impressionable Jazz found himself sitting in the green-walled annex to the Baikula Mosque in Bombay, fitted with a skull cap and equipped with a Quran. Each evening, as the adults prayed upstairs, I stared at the paint peeling off the benches, trying to tune out the hadiths being explained by the Imam. Could I escape again by piercing some other body part? Fortunately, my cousin Rahim, who attended the same class, had alternative plans for my edification. My parents, ever pressed for time, arranged for me to spend the evenings at his home afterwards. At 16, Rahim not only exceeded me in age, but also in girth. I experienced his weight firsthand. Each time he sat on me at the end of our wrestling bouts. He insisted we strip down to our underwear like sumo wrestlers. His sweat marked my body, smelling of whatever spice lingered most dominantly from lunch. Rahim's mother had died a decade ago, and his father worked late, so we didn't have to worry about anyone supervising us. Soon we were undressing completely and wrestling in the buff. I'm not sure if my technique improved or if Rahim simply let me, but I started ending up on top more often than not. My thighs straddling his hips, my seat pressed into his crotch. Even though I left his hands free, he never pushed me off. One evening, I had the bright idea of slapping him in the face with my penis as we horsed around. He looked at me strangely, then leaned forward and took me in his mouth. Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, survivors of the coming October 19th Holocaust or future alien voyagers, this is where my journey takes its most dramatic turn. The before and after, the BC and the CE, the divine revelation that swept away all my baggage from the past. Suddenly I didn't feel hopeless. Suddenly I found myself in control. Suddenly the answers to all my questions popped and burst like fireworks. My identity flashed on, my confidence powered up, the path to my fulfillment in life blazed in the sun. Over the next few weeks, Rahim and I poked and probed and plumbed. We matched appendages to orifices in every combination that sprang to our fevered minds. Dispensing with a Wrestly, we dove directly each evening into racking up the notches on the bedpost. Not to mention the sofa, the dining table, the kitchen stool, even the telephone stand before it broke. The arduousness of some of our experiments eased appreciably when we discovered the lubrication properties of pantry ingredients. Jam was too sticky. Butter worked better than mayonnaise, but nothing rivaled the glissance of pure ghee. My parents couldn't stop beaming. How eagerly I trotted off to class every evening, how well their mosque experiment seemed to be working. They even published a paper on this. Therapeutic self-affirmative effects of religious instruction on troubled youth. The fact that I'd begun paying attention to my physique was an added bonus. Healthy mind, healthy body, just like the Quran says, my father remarked. Each morning he saw me performing calisthenics. In reality, roles had begun to emerge in my after-curricular activity. Clearly, I was the boinker, Rahim the eternal boinky. If I wanted to fit my emerging self-image, it behooved me to start pumping up.
I forgot to say that if I might nudge people along.
Oh, great.
I guess that's my role here. Other than that, I'll be quiet. Prajwal?
Hi, everyone. I call when I wrote Land Where I Flee, I decided to incorporate every South Asian taboo I could think of and have a blast with it. All right, so there is, there is sexuality, there is gender-based stuff, there is caste, class, and a lot of fun. I have a character in the book who is a eunuch, known in South Asia as a hijra. The hijras are sometimes transvestites, but more often than not, transsexual or transgendered. And this character came about when I was in an auto rickshaw in Delhi one day, stuck in traffic, and was accosted by a gaggle of eunuchs who demanded that I part with whatever money I had. Otherwise, they were going to perpetually pinch my penis or something. Yeah, it was crazy. I parted with all my money, and then I thought to myself, oh my God, the eunuchs of India are the most powerful people here. And that's when this character called Prasanthi came about. I wanted to write about eunuchs. I did extensive research. I befriended a hijra. And what I found was fascinating. The eunuchs live in their own groups. They have their own governments. They have their own memberships. Houses to which houses of which they're members. And there is a hierarchy in the eunuch world. If you're only a transvestite, you are not that well respected. If you undergo circumcision, you're more respected because eunuchs are traditionally Muslims. But if you undergo castration, you're right up there. I had seen eunuchs portrayed in various Bollywood movies, and these movies often caricatured them. They were the comic element in an otherwise silly movie, in an already silly movie. So one of the challenges that I faced when I was writing this book was that Prasanthi shouldn't be a caricature. She should be a living, breathing human being. And she works as a servant in this rich woman's house and has just now been slapped by the daughter of that woman because, she misbehaves. She's got a foul mouth, she's mean, she's conniving, but the extract I'm going to read is one of those rare places in the book. Prasanthi is reflective. She's not one prone to ruminations. Manasa, her mistress's daughter, has just slapped her, and this is what happens. After the showdown at dawn, Prasanthi had disappeared into the darkness, retreated beyond a garage, and cried. The encounter with Manasa gave rise to one unpleasant memory after another. She, therefore, did what she always did when she felt defeated. She had her dialogue with God. "How dare she treat me that way?" she asked God. "You shouldn't have made fun of her." Prasanthi answered as God. "But she's horrible. She treats me like I'm a servant." "You are a servant, and you have to put up with her only for a few days. She will be gone. I hate her, and she hates you." "Why am I made this way?" Prasanthi asked God. "Because you're special," God replied. "Is this how special people feel?" "Yes, sometimes special people feel misery." "Why couldn't I be one, man or woman?" "Because you're special. Sometimes I feel you say that only to make me feel happy." "Think of it this way," God answered. "How many people in the world can claim to be like you? How many people in Gangtok are like you? Perhaps 2? Yes, of the lakhs of people in the city, it's just you and the dancer who has run away to Siliguri. And she's the butt of all jokes." "That she is," God replied. "Why are we such jokes? Why do they always laugh at us? Why does no one take us seriously?" "You could be serious. They'd take you seriously. But you're always laughing, always dancing, always jumping. You want to be taken seriously? Behave differently. I try doing that. Sometimes I never smile, but it makes me miserable. I want to be my own self again. Am I really special? You are special. I wanted you to experience life as very few humans can. You are living a good life. It was a mechanism that had always worked. It would continue working forever. Thank you.
Excellent, thanks, Bill.
Is that working? Can you hear that?
Yep.
I was going to read a bit from my first novel, Native, which is set in Wyoming. And I'm so happy to be on this panel, these wonderful writers. I'm so happy that you people did so much work to put this together. When I looked at the topic, and as you were saying earlier, it was sort of hard to figure out why this panel was put together. It had the name Rainbow Readings, and so we thought maybe it was about unicorns. And I even had a unicorn outfit, which BK wouldn't let me wear. It's a pretty horrifying picture. When we read what it was about individual belief and conviction, which I thought, well, that's anybody, any writer, anywhere, any person. So I thought, well, maybe it's in the word rainbow, and then it would be perhaps about gay people and their beliefs. And then I began to think, well, what would I read? And I thought, well, I'll read my first book, which is a book about being gay in Wyoming, of all places. And I had been living in San Francisco. This was in the 80s, and people around me were dying, and people wouldn't even say the word AIDS in Washington, D.C. It was a pretty horrible time. Okay, so 20 years later, almost since this was published, I'm thinking, what is really different? Are we seen as just people who happen to be gay, or are we seen as gay people who are put in a separate room? And it really made me wonder about the progression and the way that we accept people. And this earlier book that I wrote was pretty much about the dangers of becoming yourself. It's not that it ought not to be an issue, I would hope. That you could just be who you are, and it's not the gay people who have the trouble with it, of course, it's everyone else. And so the way that this novel functions, it's about someone in a small town and what happens to them. And there's very real danger in living in a small town like that, and I suppose there still is. I mean, we have the right to get married, but people are busy trying to take that away. So I seem kind of upset. So I'm just going to read the opening of this book, which opens in the wilds, and then the first chapter opens with the young man Blue, who is a ranch foreman in this small town, heading into a bar in town, looking for one of his ranch hands, actually, that he's sweet on. The wind, ripe with sage, rolled particles of mountain down each spine of the Badlands, through gullies of flat-washed rock, along trails scratched into the crust. From the highest parapet of Badland, an antelope watched the moon fall from zenith. Below him, the earth plunged. Behind him, the bench rose across dark jumbles of sage, across open fields pocked with clumps of stiff grass and tundra slick at the edge of snowfields, and reached for pinnacles feeding on stars. The antelope lowered his head and rubbed his foreleg with his pronged horns. Then he raised his head, and his ears drew in sounds of wind, nothing else. But there was something below the wind, something keeping him from turning away from the edge and joining his mates in the risings toward the peaks. He knew the trails laid out below him, the escapes down over the edge, the straight lines along wire to gaps, the passages through abandoned creek bed, along flowing water, across an open hillock where soil is white, licked for salt. He always skirted the wide trail dug hugely up the valley floor, a strip of ruined grass at its center, the trail that ate a steady swath of sage, that led in only one direction, regardless of the delicacies or wanderings to each side. The trail that troubled him, though he wasn't always sure of the reason. Now, as the sound below the wind came clear, he felt the reason quiver down his limbs. A truck with stars at the front and fire behind followed the wide trail. The truck wasn't fast. He could easily outrun it. It wasn't smart. It rarely left the trail, but usually lumbered up the valley on its black wheels in stupid pursuit of nothing, leaving the antelope to pause in his escape, safely up a ridge, and watch it disappear, seemingly unaware that its quarry had been left behind. He feared it because it moved unpredictably, sometimes unloading a man who'd shoot a rifle brings strange luck. Rocks would jump at the antelope's hooves. The antelope watched until the truck's fire had burned away around a curve of the valley, and then held his head high and cried, a sharp whistle that reclaimed the valley below and echoed as he sprang away to join his mates. Chapter 1. Severed heads, antelope, deer, moose, and the moving heads, I couldn't place them, not from outside with a red neon flashing, drawing lines through couples dancing. It surprised me, so many people. Clarence sat back there on the stage, one hand on his trumpet, the other on the piano. He'd accompanied the couples for years on Saturday nights. I pushed the door open and the sprung hinge creaked, a strained scraping sound, something I'd heard from the outside passing on the sidewalk. It had been years since I'd heard it from within the doorway, but I stepped straight through as if I'd done it every Saturday night of my life, as if Mother's stories stepped with me. Max pushed off from Sally and greeted me, "Hey, Blue." His scarred ear came around as he turned away, the ear scarred from that old, sad football team back then, hardly worth a scar. Albert took my hand, pulled me toward him, gave me a hard shake, and said, "How can you stay so invisible and still run that Fisher place?" He leaned closer to say, "I wish I could convince you to manage my ranch, young man." "Thanks, I'm pretty much set already." I returned a good, solid shake, the proper gesture, pulled back out of his grip, and tried to find a way through the crowd.
Thanks, Bob. I still miss the unicorn costume.
It's in the background.
It is? Okay. Janice?
All right. So you can hear me, I suppose. Well, I'm the poet in the group guest today. My tribal affiliation is Koyunk Awi, California Indian tribe. I'm going to read a couple of poems from this book, Doubters and Dreamers. I guess what I want to say about my work, at least, is that I think our tribal histories are so erased in this country that most people wouldn't even know the name of my tribe if I said it. And called Concow in California. I think that's a shame that we've lost so much of our indigenous knowledge. And so in some ways, my poetry is about bringing back my tribal history in terms of my own family. As a mixed blood person, I have a lot of different ways of looking at that. And so part of the process I go through and part of my project, I guess, is just to reinvigorate some sense of our history. Another part of it, of course, is as a lesbian Native American writer, I have an obligation to write about my reality as well. And so that's part of what I write about. So with that said, I'll just read a couple of poems. The first one's called Indian Mascot, 1959. And I grew up in Berkeley, California, and so UC Berkeley, of course, and I also went to UC Berkeley. But back in the 50s, Stanford was the rival university, and during that period of time, Stanford's mascot was an Indian, and Stanford Red. Ours was a golden bear, which was obviously a grizzly bear extinct in California, except for their team, I guess. But anyway, Indian Mascot, 1959. This is a sestina, by the way. It's a poem in 6 stanzas with 6 lines with a repeating word in each line. Now begins the festival and rivalry of late fall, the weird debauch and daring debacle of frat boy parties as students parade foggy streets in mock processions, bearing on shoulders scrawny effigies of dead, defeated Indians cut from trees where in the twilight they had earlier been hung. Just dummies, laughs our dad. Red Indians hung or burned, it's only in jest. Every fall brings the big game against Stanford, where young scholars let off steam before the debacle they may face of failed exams. You're dead wrong, he says to Mom. They don't mock real, live Indians. Around UC campus, mock lynchings go on. Beneath porches, we see hung the scarecrow natives with fake long braids, dead from the merrymaking. On Bancroft Way, one has fallen indecorously to a lawn, a symbol of the debacle that happened 3 generations ago in California's hills, where Native peoples were strung up. A way of having fun. Where did they go, those Indian ghosts? Their kids perform mock war dances, whooping, reenacting scenes of a debacle white folks let loose, chides Mom. Meanwhile, we hang portraits of presidents on school walls and never let fall the old red, white, blue. My dear brother is dead because he fought in a white man's war. How many dead Indians do they need to feel okay? This whole thing wears on my soul. In the dark car we go silent, and the fall night gets chillier. In yards, blazing bonfires mock the stars that glow palely somewhere above. A thin moon hangs over the tule fogs. I've never heard the word debacle before and wondered what it means. What's a debacle, Mom? I ask. Oh, honey, it's a terrible and deadly collapse. Complete ruin. I've noticed how the hung Indians have their heads slumped forward. They wear old clothes, headbands with feathers, face paint, moccasins instead of boots. Little do we know, this fall, living Indians at Feather Falls leave tobacco to mark that indeed we're still here, lungs full of indigenous air. So for that, Sestina, the last little stanza is just 3 lines, and you're supposed to repeat the words that in those 3 lines that you use throughout. And so I like to tell people that what I did was make some little changes. So from hung, I changed to lung, and from debacle, I changed to tobacco. And tobacco is obviously, it's a sacred plant. And so it was just a way of revising the history. So,
here. But I mean, if you want to read more, I think you should. Absolutely, we have certain we have freedom here. Please read some more, Janice.
This is
my position is mine, by the way. So yes, please read.
Okay, this is Poema de Amor. Spent the night in Mojave at the edge of the desert, one cold January on my way home to you. At dawn, I filled the tank at an Arco, bought a steamy cup of Java, then got on the road, driving east alone. The radio waves were full of static in that old Ford Falcon, till I hit La Emisión Mexicana, and a 2-tone accordion waltzed over the wires, a duet of voices, and that lovely rapid-fire Spanish blasting up from across the border. And suddenly there were straw hats and roses, pan dulce, the Virgen de Guadalupe, thick ristras of chiles, crimson, gloriously hot. The sun crept over the horizon, a streak of cochineal, and a chilly fog drifted in gullies, socked itself in along the Colorado. How I wanted to be in your arms, while rain plummeted down in Kingman at the base of Hualapai Mountain. Snow came falling like tiny feathers all around Flagstaff, the peaks of San Francisco. I'd planned to stay in the high country, but now I kept driving out of the white drifts and into the desert. Navajo and Hopi lay to the north, Winslow and Holbrook to the east. Miles of red bluffs and dark mesas, cliffs the color of ochre, ancient seabed of shells and bones. By the time I reached Gallup, it was a matter of hours till I saw the Rio Grande. Night had descended. I could sense the presence of mountains. The wind buffeted the creaking car. Sudden gusts of snow dusted the windshield. Still, stars glittered in the black, cloudless sky. Up ahead were the lights of Albuquerque, the sandy shores of the river, and you in our first apartment down near the Bosque. How you'd smile to see me, how you'd laugh. Oh, I missed the fields and pastures of the North Valley, the crumbling adobes, the irrigation ditches, scent of piñon. I thought of the names of those staunch families, Lubato, Griegos, Candelaria, Montaño, and of you, my dear Hispana, your sweet hips and warm hugs, mi corazón. Mi bien amada, what we whispered when we made love.
Thank you. Thank you all very much. It's beautiful. So we want to open it up to discussion amongst ourselves right now, and I think we can talk about, obviously we have lots of kinds of diversity and identity, and I think what I don't think. Am I supposed to have questions as a moderator?
Yeah.
Oh,
I'm looking at you.
Okay. So I would love to. I would really like to. I mean, I'm trying to follow the rules, but no writers are good at following the rules.
Nobody has all they want.
Fantastic. Fantastic. Okay, excellent. So let's open it up to everybody and let's have a great discussion.
Okay.
I'd like that.
Any questions or contributions? I'll hand you the microphone. Don't be shy.
It's actually not fully formed, but it came to me when, Janice, you were reading and said you have an obligation to write about your reality, which I really appreciated. And BK, I don't know if you can answer questions either, but
I guess it's free form
I
now.
confess I haven't read your novel Theft yet, but I'm wondering if you feel an obligation to write about that particular reality. And the idea of obligation to write about your reality is an interesting phrase to me. I'm fascinated by it, so I would love you all to speak about that.
Janice, you want to speak? I think it was addressed to you first, and then I'll jump in.
Well, I guess I started writing because I felt like there wasn't very much literature that represented my reality, and so that was quite a long time ago. But there were obviously, Audre Lorde, many other people, Harjo, people writing wonderful poetry. But part of that reality is that mixed reality, both being gay, growing up gay, and well, it was Berkeley, so I mean, on some levels it was quite good. On other levels, just like any other place. But also the reality of being Native American and Native Californian. And somehow I could sort of be seen as almost anything else. Japanese, Hawaiian, Eskimo, I mean, really almost anything, but not in California, India. And our stories were so disappeared. So there was recently on Facebook something that came around, a student who's in Maidu, which is my tribe, in Navajo, who stood up to a professor at Sacramento State to say, when he said there wasn't a genocide here in California, to say, thank you very much, but there was. And this is just not a story that gets told. It hardly even gets told in Colorado. Where are the Utes? Where are the Kiowa? Where are the Arapaho? Where are all the people who were here? They, moved them off in the process of the genocide. So I think this is an important story to tell, and we have to say it. We have to tell it.
So I think we'll see some diversity in our approaches as well. And I think probably I'm in a privileged position because I'm white. However, my answer to your question, Marge, is that I don't feel obligated to write about anything. I listen to the characters as they come, and maybe it's a difference between poetry and fiction as well. In my book, Animal, Mineral, Radical, I talk about that I think that writing is listening, and I really just listen. I listen to the characters, and I listen to what I think needs to be said rather than what I want to say, so my ego gets out of the way. And that's it. I don't feel obligated to write about anything. I feel very obligated to listen.
Well, I'll add to that in the sense that I think being gay and from India, I did feel something within me, I wouldn't call it an obligation, but a desire more than anything else to somehow have that come out in my fiction. And for the first book and the second book, there was nothing, no hint about that. So I was always thinking about this. So when it did come out, it was seemed very essential. It wasn't really, I thought that I'd put some autobiographical stuff in it and so on, but, and I did. I put a lot in, and then I took it all out. I mean, none of that worked. So, it's this like mining my own story. I thought, wow, I can really make a lot of headway. So I got a lot of pages, and then they were all gone. So I guess by that time I had reached a stage where, I talked enough. I'd used my own experiences in little bits and pieces here and there, but this was really all fiction. So that was interesting.
But you did make a lot of headway.
I did, but it was useless. It was head. Wow, we've reached this.
We're all intimate now.
Right.
I write about the Nepali-speaking world, and this world has been very troubled for a long time now. There is a lot of instability in Nepal. The Nepali-speaking people of Bhutan have had a lot of problems. 106,000 of them were corralled out of Bhutan because Bhutan decided they were not Bhutanese enough to be Bhutanese, and they couldn't go back to Nepal because Nepal decided their ancestors had been gone from Nepal too long for them to be Nepalese. I write about all that because I've seen it happen to my people, I've seen it happen all around me. But I also realize when you write about these things, there is this added pressure, which I call the burden of representation, especially when you're one writer who is, perhaps the only writer writing in English for an international market from a certain part of the world or a certain region that has not been represented in literature as much. So in the beginning, I distanced myself from all that. I said, I write fiction with the primary purpose of telling a story. I do not write it with the aim to inform. Yes, I feel for all these refugees displaced in Bhutan, a lot of whom are now living in Denver, actually. But, if my writing is going to trigger discourse in some part of the world, if it's going to disseminate some kind of information about people that's going to help them, then why not? So, but I'm still wary of saying that, I'm still wary when people go, he's the new voice of Nepali-speaking people all over the world. It's very difficult for a fiction writer to be a voice.
Actually, I've been hearing you called the Ayatollah of...
Bill, we want to hear from you because I just got the notice that it's 5 minutes, just when we were getting intimate.
Okay,
so.
I'm going to read the rest of my book. Make sure I make my point clear. When I wrote this book, I had been living in Wyoming by myself, and then I went back to San Francisco, and that's when the AIDS crisis was starting, and my friends were dying around me all over the place. It was a very, very hard time, and a lot of people were writing AIDS novels at the time, and I didn't want to write that novel because it had been written about 50 times at the same time. And so I looked for a way to make the point where it wasn't the actual term AIDS on the surface, but that was the underlying idea of someone who's at risk of losing home or losing life. And so for me, this earlier book, I really did feel like I had to get at the core sense of what it means to be pushed out of your home. This young man who opens the novel, ends up having to leave his home because of who he is. Now, things might have gotten slightly better in this little town in Wyoming I was writing about, but maybe not. But that's the book that I wrote in order to make that point about a very specific time in history. My other books, I look through them and I think, what are they about? Well, they're mostly about home in one way or the other. This one just happened to be more about the politics of the time, even though it was removed from it and it's stuck in this small mountain town in Wyoming. It was just my way of standing next to it and going after the heart without putting the politics on the surface. But it is a pretty political book, and I wanted people to read it and feel really crappy. I mean, feel great, but feel bad about the situation.
I think there's time for one last question, if anybody has anything burning.
Question or comment?
No?
Oh, we've answered everything.
Tim?
No? Well, wait.
Everyone's completely fulfilled.
Oh, you do have a question. Okay.
Comment.